Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community Webinar. My name is Shane and I am delighted to be joined by Vesa Juvonen, who will be talking to you about the latest on SharePoint developments from product group, patterns, models, roadmap. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC17. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have for Vesa into the questions window. Some questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and you will be notified by email when it is available. Also, don't forget to join us in Dublin from the 13th to the 16th of November 2017 for the European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Conference. Since so much happened at Ignite, our tickets are selling fast, so book today at sharepointeurope.com to avoid disappointment. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Vesa Juvonen. Hello, Vesa.
Hello, Shane. Thanks for having me, and it's good to see all the people joining on the discussion as well.
Great. So I've just shared. You should be able to take control, Vesa.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Almost forgot to click the button.
No problem. And just before we get started, Vesa, can I ask you one quick question? What would you say to anyone who is thinking about coming to the European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure conference, but is still yet undecided for some unknown reason?
So if you have a look on the list of the agenda and all of the people speaking there, there's an awesome list of speakers. There's a lot of people from engineering side as well, from Redmond, and me as an example, which, well, I'm not located in Redmond, but I'm in engineering as well. So there's a lot of additional details. There's a lot of scenarios and a lot of capabilities which are actually going live after Ignite as well. So in ESPC, we'll have more announcements coming up and more details on the stuff which we talked about in Orlando last week as well.
Brilliant. Well, take it away, Vesa.
Thank you, Shane. So today we'll have a 1 hour or 58 minutes to talk about the latest on SharePoint development from the product group. So my name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a senior program manager from the team who is responsible of the SharePoint framework and all of the APIs and all of the customization story in SharePoint, in on-premises or in the cloud. And this is going to walk through on the topics related on SharePoint development from the Ignite. So what I did here is that I took quite a lot of existing slides and modified some of the slides from multiple different sessions because we wanted to have this 1 hour where we go through what is really the latest, what has been announced and what's also coming up from a roadmap perspective, and what are the things what you should be knowing and what you should know about in SharePoint development right now, so you would be up to date on what's happening. Now let's actually get on going on the agenda. I do have a few demos coming up as well, so you can actually follow up on or see live demos. Some of them which we showed already in Ignite, but we can talk about those in details as we move along within the session. Now, so latest on SharePoint development, updated assets and initiatives. So what are we actually doing for our community? What are the reusable stuff which is available for you for free to use any way you want? And what have we recently released from a development perspective? So what are the new APIs? What are the new capabilities? And for this one, I didn't just concentrate on the SharePoint framework side because even though in SharePoint engineering, we're kind of divided on a functional teams and then a SharePoint framework team, I wanted to collect the key assets across all of the teams which are relevant for SharePoint development for the field audience. Because there's quite a lot of interesting statements which came, or announcements which we did last week. So what have we recently released, what's new, and also what's coming up by the end of this year for many of these things as well. Well, let's talk about those when we get to that section. So the goals of the session is no doubt to give you an understanding on the latest on SharePoint development model. So what is the recommended ways of doing development? What is the latest capabilities? what are the latest possibilities, and hopefully you will get as excited as we are in the SharePoint engineering to actually build these things on top of the new SharePoint framework, on top of the new SharePoint experience, because this is kind of, let's say, it's the new age and new generation of SharePoint. We finally are modernizing the whole SharePoint experience, well, gradually, obviously, it's not by a snap of a finger, but this has a massive impact for you, it has a massive impact for us, and everybody is super excited. There was a really, really nice atmosphere in Ignite because people were super excited on being part of this transition to the modern ways of customizing SharePoint. Now, let's actually get ongoing. So we kind of keep the enterprise scenario here as a massive deal as well. So a few years back when we announced the SharePoint adding model, technically we kind of, how would I put it, we slightly failed on the messaging of SharePoint. SharePoint has always been around enterprise development, and it's always been around providing value for enterprises by automating functionalities and providing the necessary, let's say, the modern portals where people can actually use people can see what's relevant for them on a day-to-day basis. And maybe in the past we kind of failed on with adding model announcements and everything else. We concentrated more on the ISV, and now we're kind of turning back. SharePoint is the enterprise development platform. And one of the good examples of this is just let's say, the numbers, what we're having even in Office 365. In Office 365, we have more than 90% of Fortune 500 companies already in 365, and more are actually joining. We have more than 100 million monthly active users. That's a humongous number, to be honest. It's a mind-blowing number. And that's also a big opportunity if you're a developer, because potentially this is your audience if you're implementing something related on as a ISV solution or as an enterprise customization for the SharePoint Online. And obviously underneath the SharePoint Online, well, it is absolutely trusted and compliant. So we do have a trust center. We have regional security data centers if that's something what people want to do. So if you want to be hosted in Germany or only in the UK or only in French or in other locations in the future, you can actually choose to do so. We do have e-discover and legal hold as well in SharePoint Online if that's needed for your deployments. Now, in this session, we're going to talk about mainly on the site experience. So there's a lot of different capabilities and different ways of customizing SharePoint and SharePoint Online and Office 365. But if we think about the native SharePoint, it's all about the site experience. So sure, we have capabilities like Power BI and Flow, and we'll kind of slightly touch them today, but we're not going to actually deep dive on them because quite simply the 1 hour isn't enough for that. But they're kind of isolated. Well, they're not isolated, but they're different topics. And we should have no doubt the separate topics and separate sessions for them, for example, in the ESBC in November. So if you're interested on Power BI and Flow, there's a separate sessions on them as well. But then today we're going to talk about the site experience. So how do we extend the team and communication sides? And one thing maybe to notice here, more and more from a messaging perspective, we actually talk about extending. We don't actually talk about customizing. And that's maybe a small thing by a selection of a word, but it does have a big meaning behind it as well. So more and more when we move forward within the SharePoint in the future for SharePoint Online and in on-premises, we talk about extending the SharePoint. So we don't want to actually customize in a SharePoint in a way that people would be blocked of getting the latest and greatest capabilities. We want to extend SharePoint and SharePoint Online in a way that the end users and businesses will get all of the latest and greatest when we're pushing new functionalities out from SharePoint Online. And we do push them quite often. Every single week there's a new version of SharePoint Online being released, and that's slightly mind-blowing. And obviously that brings the challenges for all of us who are working within the SharePoint Online. There's change management challenges, there's the customization management challenges on them as well. But really the extending is the right way of thinking. How do we want to modify and maybe in quotes customize the SharePoint Online and SharePoint in general, rather than completely revamping or changing the experience. Now, we do have these other integration and other things in SharePoint as well. So we do have, no doubt, integration options, which we can integrate additional solution, additional applications on SharePoint as well. There's processes and workflows. I like the flow and Power BI. Like mentioned, we're not going to deep dive on this one section today, even though they are super, super powerful, and their maturity level is increasing all the time. So surely, whenever the flow was first released or the Power BI was first released, maybe it wasn't good enough at the time, and if you had a look on them, we would strongly encourage you to go back and have a look on what you can do with the Power BI, because you can, not Power BI, Power Apps, because with Power Apps you can modify, for example, the list views of the list. So you can design whatever custom views within the list in SharePoint Online. That's a good example, which wasn't there until pretty recently. And obviously, you can build business applications by increasing, which will increase your productivity, by providing these custom applications into SharePoint Online. And that's the custom experiences, or extending the SharePoint Online, no doubt, is the main topic of today. Now, SharePoint and there's a nice typo, I modified the slide slightly, the SharePoint as an enterprise development platform. The key points here is that for the user experience, we have the SharePoint framework, and that's one of the key topics which we're going to go through in the following hour. There's a Power BI, which we're not going to deep dive. There's the adding parts and custom actions. They're still absolutely supported, except certain functionalities like the custom actions are only supported within the classic experience, not within the modern experience, which is the latest and greatest in the SharePoint Online. On the data and APIs, graph APIs is no doubt the future where we want to go. But for time being, the graph isn't the de facto way of accessing information in SharePoint, because quite simply, the graph APIs do not expose enough of SharePoint surface through the graph API. So we need to always quite often fall back on the client-side object model or in the REST APIs. And both of them absolutely supported, absolutely will keep on evolving them as well. On the Files API, we have a unified Files API through the graph already, which we can use to access files in a OneDrive or within a SharePoint, and that's super cool as well. In the processes side, the newest thing is the webhooks, but that was announced roughly a year ago, and that was mainly for the list items. And one of the things what people have been asking for quite a lot within the last year is the webhook for site creation and site behavior. And we'll come back on that business requirement slightly later within the presentation. But for that time being, the webhooks are mainly for list items. We have the Microsoft Flow, which we can use, and we can actually have a quick demo on that one today as well. There's still the workflow option available, fully supported still, even though we haven't actually done significant investments on that area for time being. And the remote event receivers is an option there as well. For packaging and deployments and store, SharePoint client-side solutions is the kind of the modern way of doing stuff. Now, if you're more interested on having a security level of isolation, you can still use the adding model, and we will keep on investing on the adding model. So in our roadmap, we are actually evolving the adding model to have, for example, SharePoint Framework UI capabilities, even though you would be running as in the adding mode, as like using the iframe within the pages. And still, we do have declarative sandbox solutions that's still supported, absolutely supported, not necessarily the recommended option, but still supported platform. We haven't actually removed that capability within the SharePoint Online either. Now, in the SharePoint Online gives us a lot of capabilities, and it absolutely gives us a lot of those things which we went through on the previous slides. But the extend and develop is in the modern time frame, or from this moment forward, or after the SharePoint Framework introduction, it's all about implementing the stuff using the modern client-side development, development capabilities. Like mentioned already, we're looking into modernizing also the adding model implementation. So you can actually use the same tools and same functionalities, even though you would be implementing, for example, SharePoint hosted adding or a provider hosted adding within a SharePoint Online. The key point of the SharePoint framework is that it actually provides a mobile-friendly multi-device experience. So all of your customization will natively actually adapt on the right device. It will scale natively if you follow up on our guidance and the model which we are providing. It is an open source, industry standard way of doing customizations. And this isn't anything which is specific for SharePoint. And we know no doubt that there's a learning curve. There is a massive, well, I wouldn't say massive, maybe for some it might feel massive, but there is a learning curve which we need to go through when we learn to use these new capabilities. But it's not a humongous learning curve, and after you've done that, you can actually do development on top of on any product. So you're no longer specific on a SharePoint skills. If you learn how to use Yeoman, Node.js, Scala, TypeScript, and React or Angular as an example, you are no longer a SharePoint developer. You are actually increasing the value of you being as a developer on any platform, not just on the SharePoint, because the development models and processes are exactly the same. So it is a good thing. And no doubt, we're an ID business. We need to learn anyway, day by day, new things. So yes, there is a learning curve, but there's a lot of value for going through that learning curve. Now, it's been a super busy year for us in the SharePoint framework and in engineering. So, and this probably haven't been super open, or maybe we haven't done the messaging properly, but we actually done quite a few releases of the modern SharePoint experience. So we started already more than a year ago, back in August 2016, with the first drop of SharePoint framework. And after that, we did quite a few, let's say, early release candidates, or they were not release candidates, they were kind of a preview releases, until we did a GA release back in February 23rd of 2017. Back in June, we released first version of SharePoint Framework extensions, and now in September 12th, and now in last week in Ignite, the SharePoint Framework extensions went completely GA'd. So the SharePoint Framework extensions are fully available within the SharePoint Online. And also what's interesting, a week before the GA, a week before Ignite, we released the on-premises support for SharePoint Framework. And that's super cool for us as well. So by using the feature pack 2 in SharePoint 2016, you can actually do development or run the exact same SharePoint Framework web part in both on-premises and within the online. Which is a massive deal. And in Ignite, we also announced SharePoint 2019, which will obviously support SharePoint Framework in the on-premises as well. Now, all of these things, what we see on the list, I'm not going to mention this one by one because we just simply will run out of time if I do that. But there's quite a lot of stuff which have been shipped since the last Ignite, so Ignite 2016. So there's client-side web paths, there's the workbench, the new versions of the workbench, there's APIs, we have humongous amount of samples, documentation available, modernization of the customizations, completely from an extension perspective and also from a web part perspective. The CDN support, that's an awesome thing as well, which is available for you for free if you're using SharePoint Online. Now, what's super exciting for us as well in the engineering is that we don't only provide the SharePoint framework for our third-party developers, like you who are watching the recording or being live on the webcast. So we actually provide this framework also for the first-party developers, and first-party developers are our own engineers. So the people who are building, for example, the communication sites or the modern team sites. So they are using our SharePoint framework as well. So for our team, a SharePoint framework team, this is super exciting because then we get immediate feedback from those people if there's something wrong or if we need to adjust something. And you will actually get, as a third-party developer, you'll get all of those benefits from that feedback as well. Because when you fix something for the first party, you will get fixed all of those things as well. Or you might never see even those challenges because the first party will catch them before you will get access on the latest version. Well, it slightly depends again on the schedules of the teams and their development. So all of the first out-of-the-box capabilities and the modern capabilities are using actually SharePoint Framework, which is super cool. Also, the authoring capabilities, so all of the visible authoring, the multi-column selection, all of this drag and drop editing, all of these things are built on top of SharePoint Framework. So technically, if you're a developer, you can actually implement all of these things in the same way as we can in SharePoint Engineering, which is quite cool. And also, if you have heard from Ignite, we have actually now introduced, for example, a large toolbox and a few additional capabilities which are available for people within the modern experiences. And these are good examples of the things which we provide from a SharePoint framework. And then first party are using them within the UIs, and technically you can implement exactly the same capabilities as they are within your customizations. We're now expanding our set of web parts and items in a toolbox to connectors, and we'll get more information on what all of this means in practice slightly later. But you can also have SharePoint add-ins in here. So you can absolutely use SharePoint add-ins in the modern SharePoint sites as well, and in the modern pages as well. So if you need to have, if you have existing investments on adding, or if you want to have a security isolations of the functionality, you can absolutely do that as well. Now, one of the cool things which was also released last week was the new SharePoint Admin Center. Again, completely built on top of SharePoint Framework, which is super cool for us and from an engineering perspective. But again, it provides some confidence probably for you as well that we in Microsoft, we are betting everything on SharePoint Framework. So if you're wondering, will they actually come up with a new platform within a year or two? Well, probably not, because this is actually what we use for modernizing every single thing within a SharePoint Online or in Office 365 in general. So now even other services and other products in SharePoint in Office 365 are looking into SharePoint Framework and how can they be using the same capabilities. Good example actually is the Office UI Fabric. Office UI Fabric is coming from the SharePoint engineering, but it's already being used by Visual Studio Online. It's being used by many other services in Microsoft as well, because people want to take advantage of those investments and the modernized UIs, what we've been creating in SharePoint engineering side. Good. So, and obviously for us, the big thing for you and big thing, what we want to continue doing in the future is that we want your feedback. If you feel bad about something, if you really feel about, if you have questions around, well, I'm not sure, or something is missing, let us know. Use the channels which we've been sharing in the social media. Use the Microsoft Tech community. Use the Microsoft PMP or SharePoint PMP channels, and let us know what has to be there in the future to make you happy and make your business requirements achieved as well. But good example is that the SharePoint, my SharePoint is on premises for the foreseeable future. Not a problem. We'll bring you the modernized experiences in the on-premises. As part of the SharePoint framework, SharePoint 2016 Feature Pack 2, it will be client-side web parts. But in the following version of on-premises, you will see more and more modernized UIs and extensions and everything else available within the on-premises as well. We need a custom code to meet our business needs. Yep, absolutely. Customizations or extending the SharePoint and customizing SharePoint and development on top of the SharePoint, absolutely within our radar. That's not going to go away. Be flexible, but don't break my code. Yes, we know we should never break you, and we're looking into obviously avoiding that in the future. That's one of the key objectives of the SharePoint framework. So we'll give you a contract. If you follow up on that contract, we will not break you. Obviously, we're human beings as well, so there might be some exceptions on that rule, but objective is no doubt that we don't actually break you. And you asked me to learn a bunch of new stuff, so make it worth of our time. Absolutely our objective. So we will be investing on SharePoint Framework and only on SharePoint Framework. And that's our objective in the future as well. Well, not only on SharePoint Framework, because obviously adding model, but modernizing adding model using SharePoint Framework. That sounds actually super cool as well. Now, let's get actually ongoing on the other topics. So before we go to the roadmap and what has been released, I wanted to include a few slides around the SharePoint patterns and practices, because still people are kind of running into this initiative and be like, hey, what is this? Oh, there's some interesting assets available. What I wanted to do here is quickly pinpoint you on a specific assets which are available for you for free to reuse any way you want, which is highly beneficial because that will increase your productivity to be successful within your work as well. And PMP is the easiest way to keep up to date on the changes which we will introduce in SharePoint Online or in on-premises. And just to be clear, the SharePoint PMP actually means the SharePoint developer ecosystem. So SharePoint PMP owns all of our messaging and community messaging around SharePoint development for SharePoint Online or within on-premises. So it is our SharePoint Dev ecosystem. It is the community channel. It is the initiative which owns the documentation, samples, and everything else. So if you haven't heard about the SharePoint PMP, please I'll give you some URLs and have a look on them, because we will give you a lot of guidance, reusable components, and a lot of other stuff as well. There's kind of a 3 main pillars on the PMP, which we're kind of focusing. It's to learn, reuse, and share. The number one thing, obviously, is for you to learn new stuff. So we'll give you assets, we'll give you videos, we'll give you documentation, so you can easily learn how to do SharePoint customization and the development in the right way. You can reuse. So we have a lot of reusable components and controls which you can actually take advantage, which means that you don't have to worry about all of the implementation and business logic, or the technical implementation of the stuff. You can concentrate on the business logic. And then the third thing, if you would like to do, you can absolutely share back as well. So through the PMP, you can share back and you get value out of sharing back for the community as well. And obviously, the community will get stronger, community will have more knowledge, and therefore everybody wins as long as we're sharing our learnings between each other. And let's have a quick look on all of these topics one by one. So, documentation and guidance. New things. We just modernized our documentation platform, so we are now in the docs.microsoft.com. MSDN will, well, we've already moved all of the active content away from MSDN, and all of the existing content in MSDN will gradually be moving to docs.microsoft.com/SharePoint. And this is the consolidated location for all of the SharePoint development documentation. And in future, it will actually have all of the IT Pro documentation as well. So if you go to the AKMS SP Dev Docs, you'll land to our development documentation, and we keep on evolving that. And there's a lot of updates on this one, even on a day-to-day basis. And all of these are coming from GitHub. So if you find a bug or if you find an issue, you can submit an issue and let us know that you don't agree with something on the documentation, and we can have that discussion that, okay, what's wrong, and let's see if we can update the documentation. The second big thing for the additional assets and additional value, which you'll get out of the SharePoint PMP, is our video channel. So if you go AKMS, SPDev videos or SPPMP videos, you can actually find all of the webcast recordings, quick guidance videos, tutorial videos, training videos, all of our weekly and monthly community call recordings, where we have live demos and we explain where the SharePoint is heading. There's already right now more than 200 videos in here. And I think in last month, in September, we had 130,000 watch minutes in the channel. So quite a lot of people are finding this, which is great, but of course we want to make sure that other people also know about this resource if you're looking into doing SharePoint customizations in the future. And the third thing to remember is the GitHub. So samples and solutions, all of our actually documentation is stored in a GitHub as an open source initiative as well. So solutions, samples, and SharePoint framework on the provider hosted add-in model, reusable controls and components, PMP PowerShell, awesome example, which is available in a SharePoint organization. There's more than 300 samples available across all of our repositories in here. And we're looking into having a much more easily findable, let's say, portal, sample portal in the future where you can find out what's available depending on what you're looking and what you're trying to find. Now, the reuse piece. So what's that? Well, the point being on the fact that as part of the PMP initiative, we actually provide a lot of additional assets which you can use within your customization. All of these are open source. So they are open source assets which will be available for you to use. The difference between these and, let's say, native product things is that these are not underneath, let's say, the official Microsoft supportability standards. So you can't call to Premier Support and say, hey, PMP JavaScript core doesn't work. That's not how open source actually works. So these are community-driven initiatives which you have access on the code. You can either support them by yourself or you'll use the community channels to get support on them. For many of these controls and many of these things, we have tens and tens and tens of people contributing on a monthly basis. So there's a lot of activities around and people helping around the questions as well. But let's have an example on one of these things. So I'm going to jump in my code area. So let's open up one of my Vesa Studio codes. If I can find my mouse, there's my mouse. And this one is the PMP controls. So the PMP controls is a super new thing which is released as part of, let me actually show you this one in practice. So I'm going to go in here, SPDev and the SharePoint organization. So I can find you, show you where the information can be found. So this is our GitHub in SharePoint organization. And if I try to find controls, I can actually find two repositories around controls. So SPDev FX controls React, SPDev FX property controls. And if I go either one of these, we can actually find the right code related on those things. And if I go to the wiki and documentation section, we can find what's available currently, for example, for property pane controls. And all of these controls, we use engineering resources to review the stuff and also to develop partly the stuff in the future as well. We started with a relatively small amount of these controls. So for example, for property pane controls, we have 4 of these controls. A good example being term picker. So if you want to pick a term from a taxonomy store, you can easily use this control. And I'm going to do a quick demo on that one in a second as well. Or if you want to use a people picker, you can easily use this one. And underneath, it is actually using also the Office UI Fabric controls. So it has the consistent UI. It looks like a SharePoint Online and a modern SharePoint Online. But these controls have kind of an abstraction layer on top of the Fabric controls. So you don't actually need to worry about where the data is coming, because with Fabric controls, you still need to understand what is the REST APIs. With these controls, you don't actually need to even do that. So you can just use the controls just by adding them within your web part and start using them. The other thing, if I jump here, if I go back on the React controls, so SPDev FX controls React. So these are the React-based content controls, and this is a small start. Again, a relatively small start, for example, for list view controls or a placeholder control. But we'll keep on evolving this initiative based on our first-party controls as well. So we'll keep on harvesting our development, what's happening in Redmond, and we'll get some of those controls available using this initiative. Now, what does it actually mean in practice? So let's do a quick demo on this one. So I'm going to go PnP controls. I'm going to do cop serve no process. Well, actually, let's do the process. It doesn't really matter. So starting my browser, there we go. We can see my workbench running. There's my web part popping up in this page in a second. Bum, 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 bum. There we go. If I add the PnP controls web part on a page, we can see that there's a placeholder control, and now we're in the local workbench, so we have a mock data available in here as well. But that's not actually that interesting. So let's actually flip to a proper site, so we can use this site, for example, for testing. So I'm going to go to Workbench in my SharePoint Online site. So I'm in a SharePoint Online context, and in this site, I'm going to again scroll down on the web part picker in the Workbench. I'm going to use the PnP controls. There's my web part. If I click Configure, we can see that we have, for example, the taxonomy picker, which will then show all of the taxonomies available within the tenant, and I can then, for example, select, let's say, France and Nice or German Berlin as my taxonomy. Now, what's the key point of this control is that we want to make it as easy as possible for you to use SharePoint and these kind of controls in the future. So in this case, as you can see, I can only select, as an example, only one taxonomy control or a term. Sorry, I can only select the one term for my taxonomy store because I've configured that to work like that. So now if I select that, and let's actually flip back on the code. If I modify the code slightly, I'm not going to actually deep dive on the code, but in here you can see that this is my web part implementation. Let me slightly zoom that. We are importing our taxonomy term picker in here. We're using that one as well. There's our actual implementation. There's our property pane configuration. There's our taxonomy, sorry, that's the list picker. There's our taxonomy picker. As you can see, we do not have actually the REST queries or the queries where the data is coming from. All of that is encapsulated inside of this control. So you don't have to worry about where the data is coming from. You can only configure how the data is exposed and what's the behavior of the control. So as an example, if we want to allow multi selection, I can just do true here. Let's save. It's going to recompile my implementation. It's going to go through the Webpack, and in a second, if I go back on the workbench and there we go, now it's recompiled. If I go back on the workbench, let's reload this to get the latest version of the web part available. And if we now go select the term functionality, we can see that I can do multi-selection of terms. And now if I close that one, we can see that I have a multi-selection. So only the whole purpose of these controls is to make your life as easy as possible by just providing a switches and controls and configurations. But again, you don't have to worry about where the data is coming from or how it has to be used. Property field controls is a good example. We're planning to have many controls in the future around this, so that your client-side web part development or your SharePoint framework development will be as easy as possible in the future. So that was a quick example of a reuse, or PnP PowerShell commandlets, awesome example of a reuse, where you can take advantage of the assets which we provide through the SharePoint patterns and practices. The last thing what I wanted to do here before we go to the actual roadmap and announcements which we did around the developer area is around Share. Just to pinpoint the fact that in SharePoint we have actually the most active and strongest community across all of the Office 365 products. And why it is so strong is obviously the historical reasons how we got SharePoint where it is right now. But one of the reasons is that people are also willing to share. So you don't have to, again, you can consume SharePoint PnP assets any way you want. But if you want to, you can absolutely share your knowledge back. We have tens and tens of employees from more than tens and tens of companies contributing on the SharePoint PnP initiative using the GitHub and using the other community channels. And for all of these companies, they're actually getting acknowledged in our messaging, in our monthly communications, in the dev.com blogs, and they essentially get value out of the contributions as well. And the key point here is to provide the PnP being a channel where people can help each other to be successful as well. And again, if that feels bad, you don't want to help anybody, that's fine, you don't have to. We will have absolutely people then still working on with us, and we'll keep on sharing your knowledge, and it's more than fine to just consume. But if you want to, we're more than willing to get your contributions back for the community as well. So these are the companies from which we have a permission to show the logo from those companies where the employees has contributed back on the PnP. There's a lot of other companies, a lot of other people who contributed as well. I think we crossed 320 contributors quite recently around the SharePoint organization in a GitHub, as an example. Now, latest announcements on the SharePoint development side. So let's have a look on what has been happening within a SharePoint development. What does it actually mean? So I'm going to go through a lot of this stuff quite fast, and then we'll have at least one more demo available. So SharePoint 2016 Feature Pack 2. This was released a week before Ignite, and we introduced SharePoint Framework client-side web parts on a classic basis in SharePoint Server 2016. And this is a good thing to remember. SharePoint 2016 does not have a modern experience. It has a classic experience still. SharePoint 2019, which was announced last week, will have the modern experiences more and more. But with SharePoint Framework Server 2016 Feature Pack 2, you can use the same client-side web parts in both on-premises and within the SharePoint Online. So you will have a common development platform for both sides, and that's super cool. And this was, like mentioned, this was already released a week before Ignite. We had so much to do and so much to announce in Ignite, so we actually decided to go 1 week before with this one. In Ignite, new things, Yeoman Generator 1.3. So what we wanted to have is a one template and one Yeoman generator, which you can use regardless are you writing against on-premises or within the cloud, or only within the cloud. And this is technically, there are reasons why we needed to do this. We have PnP webcasts available, which is explaining the implications and how things actually work. But if you download the latest version of SharePoint Framework Yeoman Generator 1.3, you can actually, as part of the questionnaire in the Yeoman, it will ask, is this a functionality which is supposed to work in cloud and on-premises, or is this a functionality which will only work within the cloud? And based on that selection, the Yeoman generator will then make decisions on the right versions to use and right version options to show you. As an example, if you're selecting that you're doing customization for on-premises and cloud, we were not going to expose you an option for extensions because SharePoint Framework extensions are not available within on-premises. For yet, they will come over there as well. But like mentioned, this was released last week, Monday last week, well, more than 1.5 weeks ago, so way past this time. So time flies so fast. Now, the reason to release more stuff, tenant-wide deployment, a massive deal. So they'll say whenever we went live with the SharePoint framework in GA back in February, one of the questions was that, hey, I have this web part. How do I get my custom web part available for all of my sites, hundreds of thousands of sites within my Office 365 tenant? And tenant-wide deployment is actually the answer for that one. So if the solution or the web part has been marked with the right setting, you can actually get the web part to be available across all of the sites just by adding that one on the app catalog. And when that's being added on the app catalog, then the tenant administrator is shown a confirmation that do you actually want to do this? And if the answer is yes, then the web part will be automatically available across all of the sites within that tenant. So super cool capability. This works also for extensions with the certain caveats, which we're not going to deep dive on this session. But it does work with an extension. I'm going to quickly prove that within the last demo, which I'm going to do today. But released, which is super cool. Now, obviously the big thing for last week was the GA. GA meaning the public availability of SharePoint Framework extensions. So having those application customizer, the command set customizer, and the field customizer now fully available across all of the tenants within a SharePoint Online. And that's being now completely released. So if it doesn't matter what tenant type you're using, a dev tenant or a first release tenant or a general tenant, all of those tenant types have now SharePoint Framework extensions available, which is super, super cool. Now, quick demo on that one. So let's have a quick demo on what does the extensions actually mean in the modern experiences. So I'm going to jump back in here. I'm going to stop that demo, which was still running. And I'm going to jump into this another demo, which is a relatively simple demo, but it shows nicely the value of the extensions as well. And what is the difference between the extensions and client-side web parts. So this is taxonomy navigation bar. And this is kind of a relatively typical requirement or typical request. Let me go to a site, which I'm going to use for demonstration. So let's actually get in here. And let's go to the team side and let me load that. And we have again some caching things. I'm going to do quickly follow in. So true equals reset equals true. So we'll get rid of that caching thingy. That's related on the development time experience. Every now and then you get that kind of a cached debugging experience available. Now, in many cases, people, in modern experiences, people want to have, for example, let's say toolbars or footers with the dynamic content or menus or whatever. You have a requirement for show the latest tools or personalized tools for one particular user. And without the extension, this was not really possible within the modern experiences. So basically, in the classic experience, you could have used custom master page, which is not definitely a recommended option because that blocks your end users to access latest and greatest from a functionality perspective. Or you might have used the user custom action, but the user custom actions are not available within the modern experience. Now, with SharePoint Framework Extension, you can easily implement an application customizer, as an example, which will be available across all of the pages within your site. So it doesn't really matter which location you are in a site. Are you in a list view or are you in a site contents view? But your extension will be executed. So let's have a look on this one. I'm going to run this in a debug mode. So I'm going to do observe no browser. And I'm going to actually run that directly using the query parameter option. So because I'm running the functionality from my local host against the SharePoint Online, which is a typical development experience with SharePoint Framework extensions. So that is getting now transcompiled. My TypeScript is getting transcompiled to JavaScript. And now I can actually use that within the UI. So I'm going to move back on my site. And I'm going to actually paste in a query parameter here, which will instruct SharePoint to talk against my on-premises and include my customization within the site. And this is relatively small customization, which is now actually present in a site. You might have even missed it. unless I'm actually pinpointing where it is. So this customization is a good example. We added a footer in the page, which could be there in every single page of the site. It doesn't matter where the user goes, the footer follows the user. And then it's up to us what do we want to do within the footer. In this case, it is actually providing a list of tools. So it is providing a list of links, for example, for company locations and reusable assets and, reusable locations within a company which might be meaningful for the company. Quite typical scenario in a global intranet or intranet scenario. And many of those links could be just as well, let's say, personalized. It could be based on the organization of the user, where the user is located, and we'll show another link available in this list of links. So good example of a small extension, super simple, a relatively simple extension, but actually which provides the typical scenario which people need to have when we are implementing intranets within a SharePoint Online or in typical in top of the SharePoint. Good. I'm not going to deep dive what it is and do timing perspective, but we have more guidance on coming up on all of these things. That sample will be available within a matter of days as well, and also we'll have videos on how to make all of this happening as well. Now, one of the things which we announced in Ignite was also tenant properties. So if you are a SharePoint framework developer, you might be interested on this one. So tenant administrator can create and manage tenant level properties, which are then accessible by the web parts and extensions. So this could be, let's say, application key, or it might be general URL, where you want to make sure that that URL is only stored once within a tenant level, but it's being exposed from numerous instances within a site. Or application key, no doubt, is a good scenario as well. If you need to have all of your web parts to read, let's say, being a map application key from a single location, you can use the tenant properties for doing so. And this one is now in first release option. More stuff, custom themes. So the modern custom themes is now fully documented as well. We released this one to be in the first release mode last week as well. If you go to docs.microsoft.com, you'll find documentation how to create a theme. There's even a theme builder for you to modify and enable custom themes to be created within Office 365 tenants. And we're looking into more and more guidance on how do you then assign all of these things. You can already today assign this theme to a site. You can add your custom theme to be available within Office 365 tenants, and you can query all of the existing themes as well. Now, coming soon, this is interesting. So what's in the roadmap? So what's actually going to happen? So a few technical things. If you are a developer, we are looking into having much more, let's say, understandable and better story around Office UI Fabric core styles. And the core styles, Office UI Fabric core styles, is something what people would like to use, but there has been challenges around using this one efficiently, depending on what kind of framework we've been using within your customizations. So this one will be released relatively soon and will be available for you to consume within your customizations. Super interesting scenario, and there's a good video and demo on this one from Ignite. So configure web APIs and permission scopes for access. What does that mean? And maybe not a nice title and super easily clarified thing, but what it means is that you can actually configure which are the graph scopes which your customization have access within your Office 365 tenant. So if you need to call a custom web API, for example, with your identity in your Office 365 tenant to get access on additional information, using this functionality you can do that. Or if you need to expose additional scopes, additional permissions for your Graph API to get access on additional capabilities within your Office 365 deployment, you can actually do that. So super powerful scenario for tenant administrators to expose additional endpoints for SharePoint framework customizations. Now, ALM APIs, super cool thing as well. So classic requirements, even from the early dawns of adding model. So quite a few years we've been waiting for this one. We're finally getting in. How would I get my add-in or SharePoint framework solution deployed to the site or site by site automatically? And the ALM APIs are actually there to make that happen. So this one will have then APIs to deploy your solution to specific sites or one by one to the sites, to deploy, delete, update, and all of that. So all of the needed programmatic options to manage your add-ins and also your customization in a site-by-site basis. And this is coming quite soon as well. Additional things which are coming quite soon as well, and these are the things which we probably demo live more and more, or might be announcing this in the ESBC, so definitely don't want to miss ESBC this year in Dublin. So one of the things is asset packaging. So one of the challenges, one of the feedback we've been getting is that, okay, I get it. So you want me to host my JavaScript customizations in a CDN, and then I need to deploy this SPPKG package to the app catalog. But that's pretty complex. Anyway, we could automate that in a way that if we have Office 365 CDN available and enabled in a tenant, we could actually include those assets directly to the SharePoint Framework package. And then as long as you deploy that to your tenant, voila, everything is up and running automatically. And that's something what we're currently implementing as well. So coming quite soon. The last thing before we do a quick demo, or well, not the last thing, there's a few things still, but we'll have one demo coming up pretty soon as well. Super interesting scenario as well. So based on our feedback, people don't want all of the application, all of the web parts to be available in all of the sites, which makes actually a lot of sense. So how could you, for example, enable a subset of your solutions for testing or piloting in a subset of site collections? And this is where the site collection scope app catalog will help. So you're able to actually, tenant administrator is able to enable a site collection scope catalog in a specific site collection. So as an example, you want to expose additional web parts or customizations only within the intranet, but not within the collaboration sites, or whatever is your, let's say, decision on whatever way you want to expose and what. Using the site collection scope app catalog, you can actually do that. So you're able to isolate which of the solutions are available in which of the sites, and it has a tenant admin level control as well. And that's coming soon, super soon as well. Now, the last thing what I wanted to quickly touch before we go to a demo section is the custom, excuse me, custom site designs. Excuse me. And this is actually super cool functionality as well. And this is for automating additional configurations and settings on top of the modern site. So whenever a modern site is being created using the native SharePoint capabilities, how could we customize that? How could we make sure that our custom branding or our, let's say, business requirements are being met by using the native out-of-the-box capabilities? And this kind of relates on the webhook functionality, which I mentioned when we started. So in the past, people have been asking, hey, I want to have a webhook for site-created event. Why do you need to have a webhook for site-created event? Well, I want to customize the site whenever somebody creates a new site using the SharePoint functionality or SharePoint UIs. And this is what this one is actually doing. So this one is it's not yet available. I can do a quick demo, and we'll do a quick demo on this one, but it's coming soon, and it will be supporting extensibility points, and that's super, super, super cool. If you're interested on how to make this following demo to happen, please join on the SharePoint PMP special interest group community call tomorrow, Thursday, where we actually walk through all of the bits and details. How do we integrate our custom solution and custom provisioning solution to out-of-the-box provisioning scenarios? So let me jump on this one and do a quick demo. Taking a sip of water because I've been talking too much, so listening too fast. No. So let's do a quick demo on this one. So I'm going to jump on a SharePoint deployment. And this is one of, let's say, this is tenant, which is using functionalities which are not yet available for normal tenants. So this is a engineering-only tenant, which we used in Ignite as well. But if we start creating a new site using the out-of-the-box capabilities here, and I choose the team site as a selection, we can actually see different site designs. And these are site designs which you as a tenant administrator or tenant administrator can control. So a selection of configurations, what will happen on top of the out-of-the-box site being created. So we'll create a site, and then we'll do something extra. For example, apply a custom theme, or create a new list, or create a new functionality. Now, in this case, I'm going to create a Contoso travel, and let's call this Dublin November trip, because we're heading to the ESPC on November. And let me create a new site based on that selection. So I'm going to click Next. And because it's a new modern site, the creation of the site takes only a few seconds, which we can see actually when the finish goes through. Right now, the site design has not yet been activated, but when I click Finish, this is when the magic actually happens. So our site design is getting now activated and starts applying settings on top of the newly created site. So in here on the right side, we can actually see the site design. And in this case, we created a new list. We created another list. Then we triggered flow record, and then we applied a custom theme. What's the most interesting part here is actually this one. So when we created the site, or when the site design action started, we actually started a flow as well. So we're able to hook in a custom flow to the site design. And that's actually super cool, because now you can actually design what happens when a site is getting created. And in this case, we just created a flow. So if I go to Edit Flow, and just to quickly explain what this flow is doing, this is the receival of the request. So we're getting actually the URL of the site, which was just created as a parameter. And then what we do here is that we create an item. That's not actually technically necessary. It's just to show that we can extend the flow any way we want. So you could fork the flow, you could do additional things and all of that. But in this case, we wanted to actually have an extensibility point. We wanted to make sure that our custom code is also executed. So what happened was that we actually added a message as the web URL to a storage queue. So we added a message on Azure Storage Queue, which was actually the URL of the site which was just created. And this is our way of then extending whatever we want from a business process perspective. So now if I go to my Azure site, I'm going to drag and drop this window in here. In this case, we just simply had an Azure function waiting in the Microsoft Azure. In this Azure function, we're doing something as simple as we are using PMP PowerShell. We're connecting to that site, which we got we got the URL as a parameter over there. Oh, that's actually where we got the URL as a parameter. Then we connect against that site using the app-only access token, our app-only address, and then we apply a custom template on top of the site. So typical PMP provisioning model techniques, but technically what we're doing is that we're applying a custom configurations for the welcome page of the site, because quite often people and customers have requirements for the custom welcome page. So that one is getting executed. We actually can see that it was just executed a few minutes ago, and our settings have been Dublin November trip has been tackled. What actually got executed was following. So I'm going to quickly show this. This is using the PMP provisioning engine. Where does it actually open up? In here. So it's using the PMP provisioning engine. So it has a XML level configuration. That's the actual template which is getting applied on the site. I'm not going to deep dive on this one again for the sake of the timing. But let's go back on the site. So let's go back on the site where we actually had that creation ongoing. Where's our Dublin November trip? You can see that that's the out-of-the-box welcome page. If I click Finish, we can see that the whole welcome page has been modified. Plus, we have something interesting on the site. We have a custom third-party web part, which is the to-dos web part. We have a completely custom layout on the page. We modified the sections and the columns and the web part, and we also included a custom footer as an extension here. So technically, whenever the site designs are coming out, you can absolutely automate whatever UI designs, whatever template designs you want within your SharePoint Online using the native out-of-the-box site provisioning flow. And that's super, super, super cool. Now, like mentioned, if you're interested on how did that exactly happen and what did we do there, please join on tomorrow's SharePoint PMP community call. That's going to be at 7 a.m. Pacific time, which is, let's see, that's 5 p.m. on Finnish time, 4 p.m. on Central Europe, 3 p.m. on London time or UK time. But now we're running out of time for today. So quickly, kind of a recap on the roadmap. Well, we have just shipped the on-premises support, the tenant scope deployment Geomet Generator 1.3, SharePoint Generator extension, do-not properties, and modern custom themes. Awesome stuff. Coming soon, a lot of stuff. This isn't actually the most comprehensive list. We have a lot of other stuff in the roadmap as well and in our backlog. So we're looking into more and more enhancing and simplifying your functionality and your customizations and simplifying the or making your life easier in SharePoint Online in the future and on premises in the future as well. Now, if you're interested on all of the techniques or any of the techniques which we showed today and what's actually happening, please have a look on AKMS SPPMP. This is a SharePoint Patterns and Practices welcome page where you have links on numerous different locations and where you can actually find videos, documentation, and all of that stuff. We will revamp that welcome page relatively soon. So right now it's quite a hectic page, but you'll get access, you'll get an idea of all of the assets which are available. The key point of the SharePoint PMP is that it is our channel to give you and keep you up to date on what's actually happening from an engineering perspective, give you the guidance, give you the videos and all of the other assets which are available. But good, we're hitting the hour, and I think we agreed that there will be a question Q&A session and Q&A based on the written format in the tool. Right, Shane?
Thanks, Vesa. Super presentation. Yeah, we have a few questions here, Vesa, so we'll try and get through them as quickly as possible. Cool. The first one, when will we get an option to create communication sites as site collections? We prefer to do this than let users create subsites.
Yes, so the communication site creation, it's coming soon. So it will be there for the modern admin UI. The PowerShell support for that one is coming within weeks rather than months. The API support to create a communication site technically was supposed to be there last week, but unfortunately our engineer had a human error and there was a bug, and that bug is now blocking that API to work. So it will be available within a week or two. The bug has been solved, but we need to wait that bug to roll or to fix the roll into the production. After that, we have an API to create communication sites in production as well.
Okay. Will Graph API cover other SharePoint functionality which is available only through REST now?
Answer is yes. This is super complex question. Or it sounds like a simple question, but then it's a super complex answer. Let's put it this way. We will keep on investing more and more on the graph, so because we want to have a unified API in the graph. Now, the challenge in the case of SharePoint is that the SharePoint has a massive API surface. So it does take a while for our graph resources and graph engineering to catch up and keep up with the REST APIs in SharePoint. We anyway need to have those REST APIs for SharePoint for our own usage, for our own engineering usage. And then the graph people will implement let's say the surroundings on top of that. That's why it is always slightly delayed, but it's coming. More capabilities will be there.
Okay. Will site collection app catalog be available this year or next?
Intention is this year, absolutely this year. So okay. We're looking into it. Might be that it happens, announcement happens in ESPC, but I can't promise that because it might be that in the last line there's a bug and then it will be slightly delayed.
Okay. Does Field Customizer work in List Web Part?
Does Field Customizers work in List Web Part? For time being, I don't think so. No, I haven't actually checked that, the modern web part. Definitely not in the classic web part because Field Customizers are for modern experiences. In the modern experiences, there's a new list web part. It should support them sooner or later. I haven't checked the latest status on that one. Is it already supporting them? Good question.
Okay, and last question. When will we get the in-place record declaration capability for the list item in CSOM, okay, on-prem?
So this is the in-place records management for, or declare a record for an item in on-premises. Super specific question, but I think I just got an email on that one, and my understanding is that capability was actually in the September CU for 2013 or 2016. But now, I cannot confirm that because I haven't installed that personally. My understanding is that it's in the September CU. But if you're implementing anything on top of that dependency, you cannot use the CSUM, which is coming as a NuGet. You need to reference the CSUM templates, which are available from a server side, so you'll get access on the latest and greatest APIs. Slightly complex scenario. Please, if you have questions around that one, do, let's say, open a Microsoft Tech community question in the SharePoint dev group and CC me on that, and I'll jump on, try to help on getting that one clarified.
Brilliant. Vesa, thank you so much for your time today and your fantastic webinar to the community. Very much appreciated. Looking forward to seeing you in Dublin in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you for having me, and we'll see you absolutely in Dublin.
Great. Okay, everybody, that is it for now. Join us for our next Ignite Roundup webinar tomorrow, Thursday, October 5th, 2017, from 3 to 4 p.m. CEST, when we will learn the latest from Microsoft Ignite for IT pros with Jose Rone, Chief Research Officer with Solava in Finland. Thank you for attending and have a great day.